The Others is a supernatural movie based on Earthbound Spirits. I'm Mark Beale. I'm a spiritual therapy trainer and a spirit releasement therapist. So I work therapeutically with Earthbound Spirits. So I'll explain this movie from my professional perspective. Movies can tell meaningful stories and convey real spiritual lessons, yet they can also present simplifications and exaggerations due to cinematic license. I'll look at key scenes and the overall themes and story to sort out the facts from the fiction and compare aspects of the story to real-life therapeutic cases, and I'll do this with full spoilers. So, a quick recap of the story that was hidden for so long in the movie. The Others takes place in a mansion owned by a nervy mother and her 2 children. 3 servants mysteriously arrive who had previously worked at the house. The mother is intent on protecting her photosensitive children from light with thick curtains and shut doors. The daughter sees ghosts in the house. Her mother is scared and tells her to stop lying. The twist comes when we learn that the servants are ghosts who died in the house 100 years before, and the mother and children are ghosts who died weeks before. The mother had had a mental breakdown. She'd smothered her children and shot herself. Those that the daughter thought were ghosts were revealed to be living people trying to deal with the ghosts of the mother and her 2 children. The Others, by its very title, plays with the idea of us versus them. It leads us to assume Grace and her children are like us. We should be afraid for them and not be afraid of them. I like the idea behind this because it makes us realize that a ghost is not a scary other. They are like us. One way to approach the subject with less fear and more calm is to use precise, specific linguistic terms. This clarity can allow us to replace emotionally loaded terms like ghost with therapeutic technical terms like earthbound spirits. The Others plays with the stereotypes around the word ghost. The girl Anne tells her little brother Nicholas that ghosts wear sheets and carry chains. When Anne sees Victor, she's not afraid because he does not fit that description. One reason they don't recognize themselves as ghosts is because they don't conform to their idea of what a ghost is. An earthbound spirit is the spiritual energy of a person that used to have a body but has now passed away but has not fully transitioned into the light. They remain bound to the earth plane instead of going fully into the spiritual plane. They can then attach to living people and possibly to places. A key theme in the movie is facing reality, and the language we use is significant for that. If we call earthbound spirits ghosts and run from them in doubt or disbelieve them, we are blocking out a level of reality through our fear or through our ignorance. As humans, we tend to do this about a great many things, not just the spiritual. We see what we want to see. We block out what we do not want to see. We dismiss it. We see through the narrow prism of our limited beliefs or our misconceptions. So why is this? Our conscious mind is a self-justifying, filtering mechanism whose job is not to perceive reality as it is. Its job is to greatly simplify the world so we can function in it and protect ourselves physically and psychologically. Humans do this, and earthbound spirits can continue to do this. This is part of the beauty of this film. We think that Grace is an alive person with recognizable psychological traits. So it's very familiar to us and not very otherly to see her self-justifying behavior and her limited fear-based thinking. We come to realize she is an earthbound spirit, and it is these exact same mental tendencies and psychological principles that are the reason she is earthbound. The whole movie uses psychological traits we recognize and shows their implications in the spiritual world. Blocking the light. Grace starts the movie in agitated fear, with a blood-curdling scream. The movie misdirects us to believe that she is afraid for her children because of their photosensitivity. In fact, all of this is a misdirection by Grace and a projection of her own fear onto the children. Grace created the idea that the children had photosensitivity and she must protect them from literal sunlight, otherwise their skin would bubble and burn and they would die in minutes. Yet Grace knew at some level it was she that would face mortal peril if she faced the reality of what she'd done. She felt she would be the one to burn in the fires of hell for the crime she committed. She had to always shut one door before opening another one, yet what she was really doing was shutting the doors of her mind so the truth could not flood in. The light Grace was afraid of was in truth moving into the light, of leaving the earth plane and entering the spiritual plane. Her deep religious beliefs and the misconceptions around these led her to believe that going into the light would bring her punishment. The names chosen for these characters are symbolic and give us more clues to the meaning of the story. Grace as a name has the meaning forgiveness, repentance, regeneration, and salvation. In the Bible, the name Grace is described as meaning the unmerited favor of God towards humankind. By choosing this name, Grace, for the character, the writers reveal to us her whole story. Grace killed her children and committed suicide. She feels as a human she has merited no favor from God. Yet despite this, her name from Christianity tells us she will still yet receive forgiveness. When she can realize and admit what she's done and repent, her salvation can come by leaving the earth plane. Until then, she's stuck, connected to her previous horrifying existence. The daughter is Anne, and Anne as a name has the meaning favored grace. So Anne essentially has the same name as her mother Grace, but better. Anne is in conflict with her mother Grace throughout the movie. By giving Anne this name, the writers are rightly taking her side. Anne is the one that deals best with the situation. Grace blames, criticizes, and attacks Anne, saying she's wrong, when in fact Anne was right all along. Nicholas is the son, and as a name, Nicholas has the meaning victory of the people, which is derived from the Greek Nike, meaning victory, and Laos, meaning people. So the name Nicholas contains the name Victor, connecting him to the boy of the alive family. Though they are the others, they have essentially the same name also. Victor as a name has the meaning conqueror, which is derived from the French to win. Victor was a common name for Christian saints, and they interpreted this as Christ's victory over sin and death. It is Anne who recites the Bible as punishment. It is Grace who listens but does not hear. The others is the story of Grace's attempts to avoid her sin and death by avoiding going into the light. She must hold a background belief of a vengeful God. Her actions do not demonstrate that she has faith that the truth is God or the light is love and is forgiving. Instead, she is fearful of God. Anne is the vehicle to see Victor and victory, to conquer Grace's fear, to remove her from an existence in purgatory, and to guide her into the light so she may repent, receive forgiveness, regeneration, and salvation. The others, through its story and character names, assures us that though Grace may feel she did not merit it, she nevertheless will receive the favor of God towards her, so she should not be afraid to see and go into the light. In real life, as a spirit releasement therapist, I also see and communicate with earthbound spirits who are afraid of the light. And part of my job as a therapist is to help them understand and recognize that the light is an ultimately wise, loving, and forgiving place. So I'm able to persuade or help them to move into that light. As a therapist, I work with some people who believe in spirits and some people who don't. I work with some people who are religious, some people who are not. I work with some religious Christians and some people who are religious from other spiritual denominations. Spirit releasement is essentially non-secular, but I'll work with the beliefs of whomever I'm working with. So sometimes I may appeal to the Archangel Michael or to God. Sometimes I'll use the words the light. These words tend to be understood and both can be effective. So how are earthbound spirits created? Well, when people die, the spiritual body of most people leaves the earth plane and goes into the light and fully into the spiritual plane within at most a few weeks. If spirits don't go into the light within a few weeks, they can become earthbound spirits. This can happen because 1. Sometimes they don't see or find the light. They may be disorientated or confused, for example, due to a mental breakdown or a drug overdose. 2. Sometimes they do see but do not go into the light. They can't or don't want to accept that they're dead due to overwhelming feelings of anger, guilt, or unfinished business. They can then cling to a person or a place instead of going into the light. 3. Sometimes they do see the light but feel repulsed by it. They may be full of extreme hate or deathly fear of hell. The light radiates a loving forgiveness and compassion. And for these people, it's so different from the energy that they have, they actually pull away from it. They're completely out of rapport with it, resist it, and run from it. All these scenarios applied to Grace. She died during a mental breakdown. She had unfinished business and extreme guilt. She didn't resonate with the light and was overwhelmed by fear. She clung to the house to await her husband. Her children may have been confused and clung to her for protection, or possibly knowing that they could help her with her guilt and to resolve her unfinished business. Now, this brings up the issue of attaching to houses versus people. As a spirit releasement therapist, I work with people. There are some psychics who work with places. I work with people because I'm a therapist and I wait for people to come to me with a problem, and then I communicate to the spirits through the people, as the people, my clients, perceive them inside their mind. Now, one thing I'll say about this distinction between attaching to a person or a house is that often people will think that a spirit is attached to a house when in fact the spirit is attached to them. They just happen to live in the house as well. So sometimes people make a big distinction of these being two very different modalities, whereas if that person were to have a therapeutic session rather than a house clearing, they may be able to get to a therapeutic resolution that way. In cinema, we have the trope of the haunted house. In real life, I'd expect Grace to attach more to her husband out of a desire to see him again, explain and ask his forgiveness. Her husband is likely away at war at the time, so we might say that she's attached to the house to await his return. In the movie, we see Grace goes for a walk, and in the fog, somewhat miraculously finds her husband. Now, you might think this was a bizarre and unrealistic scene, but to me, this makes more sense than attaching to the house. In real life, regardless of physical separation and unknown locations, I would expect the earthbound spirit of Grace to be able to find her husband's spiritual essence, living or dead, in a spiritual plane that was well represented cinematically by the white fog. In real life, if the husband was living, he may well come for a spirit releasement therapy session. He may be triggered to do this because of his experiencing grief. He may well also experience bad dreams in his sleep, and he may well even find in his waking life he experiences a disquiet and anxiety, or even hears whispers or senses a presence of spirits around him. This may be triggered by his wife, who wants to connect with him, to apologize to him, and to ask for his forgiveness. As a therapist, I could then mediate a conversation between them, much like what did happen and was represented in the film in the discussions between Grace and Charlie, which was presented as literally occurring in their house, but that whole interaction had a very otherworldly association with it. So for me, this is a metaphor for the kind of connection that people can have in a therapeutic session. Grace may then recognize her children are earthbound spirits attached to her. This could then lead, in a therapeutic setting, to the scene in the movie of her hugging her children, explaining and apologizing. In the film, once Grace realized what was going on, she was quickly able to come to a therapeutic resolution. This is how it tends to go in real life. All the delaying and denying that was a feature of the film would have taken place in a process leading up to someone booking a spiritual releasement therapy session. Once they're actually in the therapy room, the process of getting insight, asking forgiveness, and releasing can be done quite quickly. Another question can be, why are the 3 servants still connected to the house? As a therapist, I find that the most significant earthbound spirits are attached to people. Yet in real life, there usually are some fairly random spirits also hanging around that are loosely connected to and aware of each other. These can then be released en masse after we release the major earthbound spirits. So in this case, Grace and her children would be the recent and major earthbound spirits. The servants become minor earthbound spirits. The servants could have lived in that house for most of their entire lives and felt a strong sense of duty to the place and the remaining people in the house. This may have caused them at the time to not go into their light for the weeks following their death. Once they miss their chance to go into the light, it is possible for earthbound spirits to stay in limbo for decades, even centuries, barely aware of the passage of time. So after we've released the main spirits through a detailed individual intervention, we can gather up all the peripheral spirits and have them find and move into their own light. So there are many events and themes in the others that do apply in real life, but just because some parts of this are true does not make it all true. So now I'll go through some quick fact checks, particularly the things that don't really apply in real life and a cinematic license, exaggeration, or just plain I would dispute. Firstly, in the seance scene, Grace comes in and moves the table as a spirit. For me, this is pure fiction. There is no way that a non-physical entity is moving an object directly. An earthbound spirit might move an object indirectly by influencing a physical person to lift the table, but for me, they just can't do it themselves. And I'd see this more as a cinematic nod to the spiritualism mass movement of the 19th century that was fascinated by Ouija boards and spirits knocking once for yes and twice for no. Is this true in real life? For me, this is a hard no. Secondly, there's all the rest of the physical interaction with the physical house. Constantly locking the doors, opening, closing, and removing curtains, carrying physical items. For me, all this represents is a visual misdirection to make us think that they're alive and interacting as physical beings with the physical house. So, for an outside observer, none of these things should be moving around either. Yet they could make an argument that for the earthbound spirits, their experience is that they are doing these things, but what they're participating in is more like a dreaming consciousness in which they interact with a holographic projection of the house. But in reality, they are not having real-life physical consequences on the curtains or the locks or the doors. Thirdly, the way the living family communicated with Grace's family was through the old lady. Now, this bears no resemblance to therapeutic reality. This is not how we communicate with spirits. In real life, there are some mediums who may operate like this, but for me, this is non-therapeutic. In fact, it creates an openness that has a personal cost for these mediums, and they themselves then need a therapeutic resolution. So they will often come to me and I'll work with them to heal the healer. Vacating your body to become a channel for a spirit is highly unadvisable. The ending revealed that all along there was a living family in the house. The father had tried to gather information about the ghosts and what they wanted. He was prepared to negotiate, but his wife insisted that they leave, so they did. So the resolution of the movie is that the humans vacate the house and the spirits win the house, but they lose the chance once again to go into their rightful place, which is in the light, not attached and stuck in a limbo in a physical house. In real life, I would expect the spirits to quite easily and simply move into the light, having had their redemption and forgiveness. I think the only reason they don't is because this is a horror movie, so it had to end on a horrifying, scary note. But as a spiritual therapist, I found this to be not particularly true to real life. Since Grace had come so far to admit what she'd done and to ask for forgiveness, I would expect her to be able to take the last step, to be able to leave the house, or release her attachment from her husband and then see and move into the light. This would then release and allow her children to do the same, and that likely then be followed by the servants and a bunch of other attendant earthbound spirits. Now, there is another clue in the names to why they stayed. Grace's full name is Grace Stewart, or Steward. Stewart as a last name means household guardian. Her destiny looks to be to guard and keep the house. The lesson I see is that if humans run from the house without attempting to fully engage with the spirits, to learn about them and to help them, and therefore to help themselves, then everybody loses. The earthbound spirits don't get to move on, the living lose their house. Preferably the living could have stood their ground. They could have gone beyond seeing them as the others, as this being an us versus them situation. Instead of competition, there could have been cooperation, which would have given them both a better result. So tell me in the comments, did you resonate with the others on a spiritual level? Does it remind you of anything you've experienced in real life through connection with earthbound spirits, or anything you've experienced in spiritual regression therapies? Are you a spiritual regression therapist? And does this remind you of any case studies with your clients? Are there any aspects of the others that mirror a story that you've had in your life? So let me know some of your stories in the comments. If you've got any questions about the underlying principles involved or how spirit releasement therapy works, then feel free to ask me in the comments as well. If you found this video too entertaining, check out my educational videos on YouTube or at my website, the Past Life Awakening Institute. I have foundation courses to learn about hypnosis, hypnotherapy, past lives, spirit releasement, and I have certification courses to gain experience in these fields and become qualified through extensive assignments and one-to-one video calls that we have taking you through every step of the process. If you're interested in online sessions in past life regression or spirit releasement therapy, check out my website, the Past Life Awakening Institute, to book an online session. Check out some of these other videos that cover past life regression, spirit releasement therapy, between lives therapy, hypnosis and hypnotherapy, all based on other spiritual movies. Thanks so much for watching.